Okay, we are joined by Jennifer Victor, a professor of political science at George Mason University. She joins us from Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining the programme. How important do you think the rhetoric is from today's speeches at Charlie Kirk's funeral, particularly Donald Trump's? To what extent will it influence, do you think, the tone of political debate in the weeks ahead?
Yeah, no, that's one of the main things I'm going to be looking for is exactly the tone and the language that is used, particularly when high-ranking political figures speak like Donald Trump. I've been sort of keeping my eye on the services so far, and we haven't had too many high-level political figures speaking yet. And so far, a lot of the rhetoric is about Kirk himself, and there's a lot of Christian rhetoric. It's a little bit unusual to see so much Christian mythology and religiousness, so forth, sort of combined with patriotism and nationalism. But this is the intersection of where Charlie Kirk fit in the Republican Party and the movement that he was building. So as we move into the higher ranking political figures like Donald Trump and others who are expected to speak, I'm going to be looking to see if they're sticking with that theme and sticking with mostly memorializing Kirk, or if Trump, previously what we've seen in other public events where he has spoken about Kirk, what we've seen is him using pretty incendiary language that demonizes his political opponents, that will conflate the political left or Democrats or other sort of broad words as if an entire party or an entire movement or organization is responsible for this assassination that occurred. And it's rhetoric like that that is particularly concerning, that can really increase the propensity for future political violence.
High-profile funerals historically can become something of lightning rods. How does the confluence of political grief, the conservative mobilization that we've been talking about, and media coverage all together risk pushing us towards escalation rather than reconciliation?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly the right question. And the fact that this service, this memorial, is being held in a football stadium with a secondary overflow stadium nearby, like apparently there's about 100,000 people there, and it's being carried by major news networks and so forth. So there's a tremendous amount of attention on memorializing and sort of martyrizing this political figure, this young political figure. And to me, it's also potentially sort of an aggravating or amplifying, maybe is the better word, combination where you've got a political figure, sort of anger that people are feeling and really heightened emotions as people are grieving. And then you're amplifying it through all of the cabinet members and president and so forth being there and putting it on television and holding it in a football stadium. So all of these combinations put together create potentially really dangerous conditions for people to be more attracted to extremism, to feel a greater sense of anger at their political opponents or demonization or villainization. And if we see the political figures there using that type of rhetoric, then I'm afraid this could turn into a catalyst style event. Alternatively, if the speakers are largely focused on Kirk himself and keep it sort of more insular to their own political movement, there is the potential for this not to boil over. But the fact that Trump himself is there and is likely to take advantage of this moment, unfortunately, I think makes the prior circumstance more likely.
In your view, where does America stand politically right now? What is it that makes this moment so dangerous?
Yeah, it's hard to characterize. As a political scientist, I see America sort of falling down a slope towards what people might call a dictatorship, or what I would call authoritarianism. But it's not an on-off switch, and it's not like a coin flip or a binary. It's a continuum, right? So you've got sort of freedom and democracy on one end and total autocratic control on another end. And the United States is sort of swinging now towards this much more controlled society where the people who are in favor with the political leaders, like the president, are favored, and those who aren't get jailed or removed or sued or taken off the air or whatever it is. These are not the types of things that we expect to see in democratically controlled countries. So as the United States is moving more towards this autocratic style control, events like this become turning points. They become these inflection points that are, I think, important to take note of. The way that I see it, there's a lot of people in the United States who, about a third of the country voted for Trump, about a third of the country voted for Harris, and about a third of the country didn't vote. And most people don't generally pay attention to politics. So it's hard to say how much a general public awareness there is of this sort of authoritarian slope that I'm describing. But I think there is an increasing number of people who are seeing the downward effects of a number of Trump policies, from tariffs to immigration to free speech stuff and so forth, and government closures and whatnot. And so it is coming on more and more people's radar. But what people do with that information, how they react to it, how it translates into their own political behavior, the next couple of election cycles are going to be really key in the United States to either consolidating more authoritarian control or getting the United States back towards more democratic rule.
The governor of Utah, Spencer Cox, is one of the, I think it's fair to say, one of the politicians in the minority who in recent weeks has called for calm and urged Americans to find an off-ramp from the political violence. What do you make of his position, and do you think that's possible now?
Well, I think the more that we have politicians like Spencer Cox making public pleas and strong statements like that, the better off we all are. Public opinion is a top-down enterprise. What the people at the top say, the language, the tone, the emotion that they use, the priorities that they convey are generally what sort of conveys to the public. And so when you have high-ranking, very visible people like Governor Cox has been this last week, making these kinds of statements, it really can make a difference in terms of turning the temperature down. So that's kind of why I'm really keen to see what President Trump does. Is he going to engage in rhetoric that turns the temperature down, or will he try to exploit this moment for his own more political purposes?
Jennifer, really good to get your thoughts. Jennifer Victor, Professor of Political Science at George Mason University.